Hello and welcome to this Cabinet meeting of Oxford City Council taking place on the 12th of March from the Town Hall. Thank you to all who are in attendance. We have got apologies for absence from Councillor Turner, who will be joining us online nonetheless, or at least he's hoping to. I can't see him online just yet, so he's joining now. Fantastic. So that's good. And apologies from Councillor Arshad for being slightly late. She's breaking her fast and then will be joining us shortly after that. Any other apologies for absence? Don't think so. So declarations of interest. Anybody? No. Okay. We do not have any notified addresses and questions by members of the public. No notified council addresses on any items for decision on the cabinet agenda or addresses on neighbourhood issues. I am going to take, but to defer for the moment, items raised by cabinet members so that Councillor Arshad can speak to the item on the scrutiny report on adult exploitation and modern slavery, but she won't be here for the scrutiny report, so we'll just take it a little bit later after her arrival. And that then takes us on to scrutiny reports. So Catherine, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to report back on, first of all, the 3rd of March Scrutiny Committee meeting, where we considered the City Council's annual business plan for 25-26, the allocation of preventing homelessness budget for the same period, and the adult exploitation and modern slavery report. And we made 3 recommendations across those 3 items. I should say that with the prevention of homelessness budget, we didn't have a recommendation, but I really want to thank those who attended, with Councillor Smith, Jessica Barr, Ozzy Mosley and Richard Wood, and really congratulate them on behalf of the Scrutiny Committee for their nomination for the Local Government Chronicle Award for Housing. So wish them all the best for that. Just on the item of the annual business plan, thanks to Mish and Lucy Cherry for their work, and Councillor Brown for all your leadership on this. There were 2 recommendations on this. One was sort of substantial, and one is more of an edit, really, a recommendation. So there was some clarification about the commercial accommodation levy and the ABID, so the Accommodation Business Improvement District, and just that a need to emphasise that this is really led by the businesses, and so the decision regarding whether this is adopted is sort of out of the council's control. The second point and more substantial recommendation was, welcoming this locality-based support to businesses outside the city centre, but wanting that to be extended to all of those that sort of classify as these sort of economic zones in the local plan, but also extending it further to some of these smaller economic hubs or rows of independent shops, which are really crucial to communities and walking distance from where people live. So I'll pause there on that item before moving on to the next one.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. And first of all, my apologies for the fact I wasn't actually able to attend scrutiny in the end for an important reason, which personal, but I will pass on to Councillor Hollingsworth because both of these are actually in his purview.
Yeah, I discover I've apparently agreed to them, which is good because I've not seen them before. I've seen a draft of one of them, and in skim reading them, I'm happy to say I agree with both. What I would ask, not Catherine, certainly not down to her, but if whoever minuted these as agreed could actually check who it is who's actually agreed them, because it categorically is not me, and it is supposed to be. But from Catherine's point of view, I am quite happy to agree to her wise and sensible scrutiny committee's recommendations. My complaint is slightly elsewhere.
Thank you, Alex. So then moving on then to the adult exploitation and modern slavery item, just to say that this is a scrutiny commissioned item, and I know it's not part of your cabinet meeting agenda this evening, but because it's linked with the scrutiny report, I think just want to note that. And I know Councillor Arshad will be joining us shortly, but I want to thank both her, Richard Wood and Nicola Bell, for all of the work that they've been doing on this and for the report. So really on this, we really valued the work that we were updated on regarding this, and made one recommendation, which was the fact that because this is a position that's currently funded externally, that we thought that it was valuable to assess the sustainability of funding in advance of the next budget in case that external funding becomes unavailable, because we want to ensure that this position is retained given the important work on that. I understand that Councillor Arshed will be reporting back on this later, so I'll pause here in case Councillor Brown you'd like to say anything, but otherwise I'll move on to the climate panel and the homelessness panel recommendations.
No, I have nothing to add, Catherine, so do carry on.
Thank you. So on the climate environment panel, that was the 26th of February, and there were 3 substantive items that were discussed and 3 recommendations coming from them. There was the net zero master plan, the update and overview of the work of the waste review, and then thirdly, the heat networks and zoning. So on that, there was a recommendation for each. Essentially, with the net zero master plan, there was a recommendation for a visit for councillors to see an example of one of these new builds that we're working on in the city within the council stock. And really, again, congratulating the work that has been done in this area, but it's really useful to actually see that. And I understand that is something that is now in process to be organised. With regards to the waste review, the recommendation here was that the council conduct some research to explore cost recovery from student landlords related to waste services, because they're operating as businesses and they're putting a cost onto the council, and students aren't paying for their waste to be collected. So given that there is this densification of student properties in the cities and challenges with waste management in those areas of the cities with that high student population living out, then this is something that we thought was of value, and it was suggested to us, I think, by Mish Tulla, and thank you to Mish for providing us some valuable insights during this meeting. And then the third recommendation was around exploring heat decarbonisation mapping within the city to support the work that's ongoing with the heat network, the line of work. So yeah, and we welcomed that. So yeah, I'll pause there. Those were the recommendations, and thank you again to officers and to Councillor Railton for attending that meeting.
Thanks, Catherine. Anna, did you want to respond?
Well, we've accepted all the recommendations, so I'm not sure there's a huge amount to add. I also didn't sign off mine either.
Okay, we've obviously got a bit of an issue with sign off this particular agenda, so we will come back to that outside the meeting. But equally, I think they are relatively uncontroversial recommendations for us to at least look at. So thank you very much. Okay, we then move on to your next.
Yeah, it's just the last one, and very briefly, it was the housing and homelessness panel on the 6th of March, and there were 5 items on that, but out of it 3 recommendations. There were 2 recommendations on the selective licensing implementation update, and one is around for officers to collect data from proactive visits to review the housing stock in the private rental sector in Oxford, and then secondly, prioritising an importance of a media campaign to engage with tenants' unions and organisations, and tracking this to review the success of the campaign. And then on the item of the Housing Ombudsman complaint handling assessment, there was a recommendation for officers to further reflect on how often the reports are brought to Cabinet or other suitable governing bodies as part of an ongoing review of the complaint handling process. And the panel would like to express its thanks, and I would, as chair of the scrutiny, for Councillor Smith and Councillor Railton and all the officers who worked on the panel meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Linda?
Yeah, nothing to add except to say I did sign them off.
Good, excellent, well done. Thank you, brilliant. Okay, I think in that case, we can move on to the next item on the agenda, and I'm going to vary the agenda slightly so that Councillor Turner, who's joining us online, can take his item and then leave because he's needs to go. So we're actually going to take item 12 next, which is the integrated performance report. Councillor Turner, over to you.
Yep, thanks very much indeed, colleagues. I hope you can hear okay. Apologies for a bit of background noise. I join you tonight from St Gallen railway station. St Gallen, famous for where Roberto Di Matteo's football career ended with a nasty injury. But that is not the subject I come to address you about tonight. Instead, it's the integrated performance report. And thank you, though, for your understanding that I am joining remotely due to a commitment here for a couple of days. The report's been tabled. I think there are probably three things that I want to highlight. On the general fund, there's a favourable outturn forecast, although that does allow for a transfer from reserves. Beneath that, as we talked about in the last report, we have some variations, significant ones. The temporary accommodation pressure is well known, and that is a significant challenge. Fortunately, we're doing better on interest payments and also, interestingly, car park income. Now, I have pushed officers on these points to ensure that where we've got variations and where we think they can't be addressed, they've been picked up in the budget, and I'm assured that by and large they have been. So, we were clear when we were setting our budget that in terms of temporary accommodation, we would forecast a realistic scenario, but one which did anticipate us bearing down on costs. We've also, in the final budget, introduced some extra mitigation measures, so that should help. The situation with temporary accommodation clearly remains difficult, and of course, interest payment bonuses will are dependent on interest rates, but also on relationship to capital, which I'll come on to in a moment. On the housing revenue account, we do face some challenges around repairs expenditure, which is higher than we would like, higher than forecast. Of course, a chunk of that can be capitalised, and a chunk of that is also due to particular regulatory pressures. Nonetheless, I think officers and members alike are determined to grip this. I think we'll need to move towards a position where it balances. That may not happen immediately, but both with additional cost control, but also more careful planning, so that fewer repairs are classed as urgent, we should be able to grip this better. It doesn't pose, if you like, an existential threat to the HRA, but certainly having such a high level of expenditure on repairs compared to the forecast is not in accordance with principles of good repairs management. So that is something we will need to grip. And I imagine it's something probably scrutiny will want to follow as well. Lastly, on the capital programme, there is some further slippage, mainly I think covered in previous reports. One of the biggest items around this, to be honest, is around loans to companies, and those are also particularly in relation to Ix Place, that's also dependent on some of the planning matters which are outside our control and which have been well documented before. I think for me, the logical area as well that we need to watch on that is not just around delays to the capital programme, it's also about the relationship with company dividends. And that's going to be an area that in future we're going to need to look at quite carefully. Clearly, if we predicate dividends on returns from the housing company, and if the housing company doesn't draw down loans because it can't get planning, for example, because of the well-documented Thames Water issues, that can only have an impact on dividends long term. So that's an area that we'll need to watch. The details covered in the report also around corporate risks and so on. We're fortunate to have Bill Lewis on the line, who I know will fill us in on any technical matters, as well as anything important to bring to Cabinet's notice, which I've missed. I commend the report to colleagues this evening. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Ed. And I know we also have Claire Patterson here in the room with us. So, Claire, if I turn to you first, and then Bill to see if there's anything you'd like to add.
There's nothing extra I would like to add. I think Ed has covered that very well in summary, but happy to endeavour to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Claire. Bill?
Same from me. I mean, Ed, as ever, has done a very good intro, so I'm happy to answer any questions if I need to come in that Claire can't answer.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much. Okay, Cabinet, over to you. Any questions or comments? Nigel?
I just have an observation. I think in the whole sort of section, pages 151 and 512, about 152 rather, about the overspend in terms of repairs. I think some of those spends are necessary for regulatory reasons. I think they would happen anyway. It's partly about the phasing of them. I'm less sanguine, as Ed is, I think, and most of us, about the cost of the more day-to-day repairs for council property, most of which are carried out by ODS. And I'm pleased that there is a real plan which Tom Hook is leading on my right to get a grip and improve clienting and increase transparency about that, because I think it's just been frankly too loose and we need to get a grip of it. Otherwise it'll carry on happening, and then, you know, we'll be in a place where the HRA won't be able to afford it, which is not a place we want to be. So I just wanted to contribute that. And on the voids process, I think we should really look at that very closely, compare whether our voids process is as efficient as other people's who have to deal with voids in other parts of the southeast of England or wherever is appropriate. Because I think the average length of voids is about 50 days, which is a long time. That includes 12 days when ODS are working on repairs. And the other thing is, you know, I hadn't realised that one void can equal 7 lots of work because of the knock-on effect of somebody moving into a void property which needs improvement. They then leave behind a property which needs repairs and maintenance of decorating or something, and we go down and down the list, and that's contributes to the reason why it takes so long to do it, and B, the cost base. So I think that we've got to examine that closely. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Any other questions or comments? Alex?
Yes, it's more of a question, but there's an element of comment in it. Obviously, one of the more challenging elements to plan is the various capital programme lines. And we've erred in different directions trying to pin that down. And I know that the panel that looks at this has been asking, quite rightly, some interesting and challenging questions. And much of it is, I think, because we take a small c conservative approach of wanting to allocate funds, make it clear what we're proposing to spend it on at the maximum level. And then, of course, every single item of slippage, some of which are inevitable, unforeseen things, means that there is a shortfall. But in terms of the number, the shortfall is quite large. I just wonder whether sort of financial take on that is that our planning of the finances is now more comfortable, perhaps more robust, perhaps than where we were, say, 3 or 4 years ago, because I think it is. But are there any other messages we should draw from it in terms of senses of direction, planning, that kind of thing?
I will just make my one comment, and then I'm going to come back to whoever wants to pick up some of the comments and questions amongst you. I'll start with Ed, and officers can crack in as well. I just wanted to say that for me, I mean, I agree with all the comments that have been made, but I think the housing services issue around temporary accommodation remains both a financial concern, but obviously a human concern as well. And I mean, I think that it's one of those issues that I think is very close to all of our hearts, because we are very well aware of the human misery that actually represents, of people in totally unsuitable accommodation. And that's this is not a good thing. This is not a good thing financially, but it's not good for families. And we have to continue to work really, really hard to build the housing that we know we need, because ultimately that is going to be the solution for families. Is building the homes that they need, but also to do everything we can to get people out of really poor quality accommodation as quickly as possible. And into more semi-permanent, at least temporary accommodation. And I know that officers are working really hard on this, and it's actually been, it would be far worse were it not for the fact that we have had really good officers working very, very hard on this. But I just wanted to note that. Ed, over to you to pick up any other comments and concerns and questions. Ed, we've lost your sound. You seem to, have you flicked your microphone back or something, or you've unplugged yourself? Well done.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Does that work?
Yes.
Oh, how clever. Right, sorry. Yeah, maybe there's an officer comment on this, so as well. And officers shouldn't feel constrained. I mean, what I'll give is a, sort of more political perspective. So Nigel, on the repairs situation, I completely agree with the analysis and the diagnosis. I think this is something where, across the council, we're going to have a look at this. That involves clienting, it involves the way ODS works, it involves tenancy management, involves our property team, particularly on the HRA side, and we clearly do want to grip this as best we can. The current situation is not as we'd want it to be. Just to say, I think we're having some good conversations already about gripping that. I think there's some good measures underway, but it's certainly one to watch. So, and I think, if I'm honest, in a year's time we might not be there. I think in 2 years' time we should be there, and I think we should see a positive direction of travel. That would be where I'd hope we can get to. On Alex's question about the planning of capital expenditure, so I mean, maybe there's 2 ways in which we can plan for this. One is about realistic project planning and not being over optimistic. I think we've got better at that. There is still a way to go. You still do get some optimism bias in there. And of course, also you just get curveballs. And there are more curveballs around for some of the reasons that we've talked about: cost pressures, cost inflation, planning uncertainties, particularly anything to do with the Thames Water matter and consent for house building. So, we're getting better at bearing down on the optimism bias aspect, certainly, I think, and planning projects more precisely. And also, I mean, members will recall that at budget time, we pushed back quite hard against slotting random stuff into our capital programme that wasn't worked up. I think our pipeline process is working well so that we don't have undercooked schemes going in. All of that is helpful. There's then a second bit, which is about planning the drawdown of funds. And it may be Bill actually wants to comment on that. We do now put in a fairly heavy contingency in our budget planning and in our treasury planning, assuming that there's going to be some slippage, because we know at a global level there will be, even if at an individual scheme level you can't be sure what that's going to be. And that means we're not taking money out to have it at the ready, which we then don't spend. And I think we are now really pretty good at that, but I will let Bill mark his own homework on that in a second if he wants to come in. Then the area which I think I'd come back to on this in terms of planning, where I think we're going to have to look at it quite carefully. The big numbers here are often to do with company loans, specifically the housing company, and we will just need, I think, to take an honest view when we look at the business plans going forward to make sure that our timing of when we expect loans to be released is as accurate as it can be, noting that a chunk of that's outside our control. So. Susan, on the TA bit, temporary accommodation, completely agree. Now, obviously, this is an area where officers, as you've said, are super active, and we've got new options officer funded in our budget. We've got the pilot around supported accommodation. We've got a whole range of things going on to try and source more accommodation to avoid people going into nightly charge accommodation, which is really bad for them as well as bad for the council's finances. We've got... we've also funded us, through our budget process, some additional discretionary housing payment, which I think should help. So we're doing what we can. But you're absolutely right about the principle. And one thing which I'm conscious of is that I've been on the council now for nearly 23 years. There's not been a year when we've not been talking about our housing crisis. And sometimes, you worry that people might be hearing, they've heard the same message so often, people might zone out. But the immediacy, the pressure, and ultimately the misery for families goes on. and if anything, in the current circumstances, it's getting worse. And so we absolutely have to strain every sinew to be at the houses that we need, so that we don't have people going into nightly charge accommodation. It's not sustainable financially, but more importantly, it's also wrong for the families concerned. And lastly, I note that we are responding to the government's consultation on homelessness reduction funding. It's proposing a different way of allocating it, which I don't think will work well for Oxford or places like ours. Different ways of measuring demand on housing services, and we'll need to be quite active there, because we do need all the support from government that we can get in this area.
Thanks very much, Ed. Totally agree. Bill, I think you were being named there by Ed as wanting to potentially add something to that.
Yes, it was indeed. Yeah, on the capital side of things, yes, I do think the council is getting better. I think a lot of the issues are around the phasing, and as has already been said, a lot of that is outside the council's control, but well, it's something that kind of continually needs to be looked at and made better, so project managers actually phase capital projects according to what is likely to happen. I think the thing to point out on capital, though, is that there is always a delay in getting it in because of the long-term nature of the sort of capital planning process. When we set the budgets, we set it with certain assumptions, and then, of course, in 4-5, for instance, we have the knock-on effect of anything that's happened in 3-4 that we've assumed within the budget setting process. So there's always kind of a delay in getting those improvements actually reflected in the budgets. Having said that, we do make an assessment at, as Ed's already said, at a global level of kind of reduced capital financing requirements. And the problem with that, I suppose, really is that it is at a global level. And so the impact depends on what schemes in the end do slip and what the financing methodology was for those schemes, with a bigger impact being if it's a scheme that slips that needs capital borrowing rather than one which is grant funded, which doesn't have any kind of additional cost to the council. So I think that's it really. Yes, as I say, it's just we are getting better, but there's always room for improvement.
Thanks, Bill. Claire, did you want to add anything?
I'll just add the fact that the council is working and continually progressing around its financial forecasting and its understanding of the overspend areas. The two areas that have been talked about today definitely are key, and we know that we're strengthening the work in those areas. And it is about also marrying up the forecasting of the capital programmes with the financing. So yes, I just want to reinforce that the activity that's going on within the council is very much around strengthening the response in these particular areas.
Thanks very much to everyone on that. I think we are at the end of our discussions on this item. So we're just being asked to note the out-of-turn report at the moment. So can we formally do that? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. And Ed, we will see you soon. And you are free to go, as are you, Bill and Claire. Thank you both very much for joining us as well. Councillor Arshed has been able to join us now, so I'm going back to the item that I deferred earlier, which was officially items raised by cabinet members, so that Lubna can give us her thoughts on the scrutiny report on adult exploitation and modern slavery. So, Lubna, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to cabinet to know it was more of an update, really. So it was an opportunity where all the team got together, obviously scrutinised, and there was one recommendation that went through, and it was about the actual, the funding recommendation, elaborating so basically the current position is funded by the PCC at the moment. And in order for its sustainability, we wanted to ensure that, so that could continue, to bring it to Cabinet's attention for next year round of funding, that would be kept in mind. So obviously you already know the role of anti-slavery. The coordinator is Oxfordshire, who's currently called Nicola Bell. And it was established in January 2022 with the funding from the PCC as a multi-agency framework. So ASCO follows the 4 Ps, the strategy: pursue, prevent, protect, and prepare. And we've been working over 50 partners, holding more than 200 meetings with other agencies, and we've conducted over 50 joint operations. Through these efforts, over 78 disruption plans were implemented and 70+ individuals supported to safety. We also co-organised Thames Valley Anti-Slavery Day event and delivered training and educational resources to increase our awareness. I just want to say a huge thank you, and the significant progress that Nicola Bowers brought to the anti-slavery coordinator in Oxfordshire, and has made, obviously, addressing this issue. That's been a very positive thing to see, and the vital work to continue. Therefore, I hope Cabinet accepts the recommendations from scrutiny.
Yeah, thanks, Lubna. I mean, I think the recommendation from scrutiny was to, look at the sustainability of the funding of the post, which I would interpret as making sure that we're lobbying the PCC very hard about ensuring that the post continues to be funded. So I'm very happy that we support that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We are now back, people will be relieved to hear, to the agenda as it's set out in front of you. So it will be slightly less complicated, hopefully, going forward, which means it's my report on Oxfordshire Joint Leaders Committee terms of reference, which is about as exciting as it sounds. It is quite a dry report. It's going to all of the cabinets of all of the councils in Oxfordshire, and it is just about the terms of reference of our joint meetings. This is the body that was once known as the Oxfordshire Growth Board, and then became known as the Future Oxfordshire Partnership, and now is the Oxfordshire Leaders Joint Committee. Which I think pretty much says what it does on the tin. This is the updated terms of reference. They are not particularly different to the previous terms of reference. I don't really have a lot to add. Jonathan, save me. Do say anything that you think might be interesting for people to know on this particular report.
Thank you, Leader. The only thing I would probably comment on is the terms of reference do not have any decision-making powers, so any subsequent decisions that will be made at the joint Oxfordshire leaders would need to come to each relevant council's cabinet or executive. So, but as you're right, it's just a brief refresh with a new name and scope for the organisation.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Admirably summarised there. So I'm anticipating there's probably not going to be many questions on this. No. Okay, I didn't think there would be, really. So we could have a lengthy debate on it, or we could just agree the terms of reference. Can we just agree the terms of reference?
Yes.
Thank you all very much. And thank you, Jonathan, for all your work on this as well. So great. We are now on to item 9, which is the Oxford City Council Annual Business Plan. And I'm afraid to say that's also my report. So back to me again. This is a much more significant document, particularly for the City Council. And I'd like to thank in particular Lucy for all her work on this. It is a really substantial piece of work every year to make sure that we are putting into practice the priorities of the council and developing the business plan which will deliver our strategy for the council. Obviously, it is about delivering our corporate priorities, as I said, which are good affordable housing, strong fair economy, thriving communities, zero carbon Oxford and a well-run council. And the report sets out how we intend to do that over the course of this coming year. I think and hope that people have had a chance to read it. I note Scrutiny's comments earlier, and it's very clear as well that Scrutiny had a really good look at it and came up with some quite important challenges, but also some small textual alterations which I think have been made. I hope they have anyway. Certainly will be in the kind of final version. So those were all welcomed. I'm very happy therefore to hand over to Lucy and potentially Mish if either of you want to add anything about the detail. Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Just really to explain a bit about the process that we took to develop this proposed plan for the next financial year. We reviewed the last business plan, we aligned it with the council strategy, excuse me, and colleagues across services provided a long list of potential actions and deliverables in the year. That was filtered down by a small officer team, and then we held a very constructive, interactive workshop with the corporate leadership team and a number of business leads across the service, and we whittled down a very long list of over 200 options to 34 key actions within the business plan. A lot of those other proposals that came forward as part of the long list will be carried forward into individual service plans, but following the guidance and feedback from the Local Government Association in 2023, I think we've further reduced the priorities down to 34, which is quite an achievement, I think. So there's been cross-council, cross-service contribution to the proposed plan, and we do think it feeds quite well into, if not very well, into the council's overall arching strategy.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Mish, did you want to add anything?
Well, just building on Lucy's point about prioritisation, I checked back, and in 2020, our first business plan, which is when we started producing an annual business plan, ran to 32 pages. This one runs to 6.
Hurrah! Genuinely, that is an achievement. It is one of the things I was very keen on when I first became leader, was trying to reduce the length of council cabinet reports and council reports generally. I don't always succeed, but this may be one of the few. Well done, Lucy. Has anyone got any questions or comments on the report? Alex, I can see you've got your hand up.
I've got a question. I fear it's the sort of question you'd expect me to have, which is I've read something and I don't fully understand something involving numbers and such like. So it may be a wording thing, or it might be my comprehension. So priority 4, zero carbon Oxford, year 2 actions, action 1 to be precise, which is on page 44. Which is the aspiration for meeting energy efficiency targets for both housing stock and non-housing stock. For the non-housing stock, it says it will meet EPC-B, but for housing, it says it will meet 95% average EPC-C. So that sounds like it's 2 different things. Does it mean that the average EPC will be C? Does it mean that 95% of them will reach EPC-C? Does it mean something in between? So it's that little bit of wording, and it is quite an important thing. It's something I know Linda's been talking about. It's a really key target. I'm just not quite sure exactly what we're trying to do there. Are we trying to reach 95% of the housing stock to EPC-C? Are we trying to get the average across to EPC-C, which will be a different target, or what?
Is the word average there unnecessary? I think is what we're.
Sorry, that was a long way.
Yeah, I think is where we're heading. Linda.
It's the first one. We want 95% of our council homes to have an EPC rating of C or above.
Yeah, I think in that case, we just need to lose the word average there because it's not adding anything, it's just all adding confusion. Yeah, yeah. Okay, but thank you, because that's, yeah, it isn't correct. Okay, has anyone got any other questions or comments or want to shout about some particularly exciting priorities in the business plan? Well, you're a miserable lot this afternoon, so okay.
Can I say,
Yeah,
can I say, having removed the word average because I was confused, I already thought that was one of the absolutely key important things we're doing. We're talking about something that fundamentally changes people's lives, families who live in our homes, in our city. So it's their lives as well as the environmental benefits of it. So I would say that is a very high profile thing, and we should be very pleased that it is there as a target, and we should be honest about the challenge that will be faced in getting there, but also the importance of it, which is why I'm glad to see it as number one in the list, which presumably makes it the most important.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, because no one else is, that I am really proud of this plan. It's really ambitious. I think it reflects really well our ambitions for the City of Oxford, for our local economy, for our local residents and for our local businesses. I do commend it to people. I think there's a lot of really good things in it. We will have to collectively make sure that we're going to deliver it. And each individual cabinet member around the table does have a role in making sure that we do deliver it, as do all the officers here. So, you know, we've got a good plan, and I hope we can deliver on it. Joey, did you want to add something?
Yes, Chair, just because you said somebody should speak, so I just wanted to speak as well. Yes. Cabinet members and everybody are aware our investment in the leisure centres. If you visit our leisure centres, you would have seen the improvement in the new gym equipment. You could have seen the work on the Leeds Youth Hub. We are continuing that investment program where other local authorities are closing their swimming pools. So they are good stuff, as you have said, Chair, in this business plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joey. Nigel.
Well, you're wanting to hear good news things. So the first good news thing from my perspective is that actually there is a priority 5 now, which there wasn't and so public anyway, which was the well-run council, because we do have to justify why we spend public money in the way we do, and we have to do it in an efficient and effective way. So it's good to see those priorities. And in those priorities, I'm particularly proud of some of the work we're doing around developing staff within the organisation, which we had a good presentation about at the partnership meeting earlier this week with the unions. So it's good to see that's got a highlight. It's good to see that the issue about the commissioning and managing of Oxford Direct Services, which we talked about earlier on in the meeting, has salience in this paper. And then on the ICT AI connectivity issue, there's some really interesting work going on in the council by members of staff who have taken on so-called AI apprenticeships. They're not full-time apprenticeships, they're opportunities to use AI in their various business areas. And I think it'd be nice to hear a bit more about that. So I hope we might be able to do a presentation about that in the future, because, I think the council's embracing AI in a kind of sensible way, not going mad about it, but actually looking for the right places to use it. I think it should be commended for that.
Thank you, Nigel. Alex.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to make up for my minor techie question in that, and I still think that is a fundamentally important aim. What I did want to signal praise of, but also signal the importance of, it's in priority 2, the strong, fair economy, and the way it brings together 2 really fundamental things that we need to do, possibly facing in different directions in the sense of who we are trying to reach with those aims, but something which needs to be done together. So if you look at action number 4 of those actions, it is working with the new Oxford Growth Commission and sending a message to our stakeholders, partners, investors in this city who, we've seen levels of investment from industry, from employers, which have been good, but I think we're still treated as potentially a slightly tricky place. We need to be making sure that we're fully meeting their requirements and selling to government who want to see Oxford as one of the fastest growing cities, economies in the country, something which we were. If you look at our history, 1920s and 1930s, this was the fastest growing, economically growing city in the UK. And we need to reflect that, respect it, and to be quite clear to the people we're working with that we are up for that again. So that's a really important element of it. But the other elements which are tucked away, not tucked away, they're right at the top, that this economic growth, which we support and which is a profound and important thing for Oxford and for the country, but for Oxford, it has to be economic growth that applies to everyone. It is no good if it is just coming to some of our community and bypassing other parts of our community. So the things which integrate that economic growth into every single age group, every single ethnic group, every single part of our community is absolutely essential. So that to me is a very important, very interesting and very challenging work that I know officers are already building and have been for some time, but those two things taken together, delivered together, that's the important thing that we need to be looking at.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, thank you all for your comments and contributions. And as I said, I think this is an ambitious plan, but we are ambitious for our city on behalf of our residents. And I think that's important because we do need to be driving the change that people need. We do need to be building the houses. We do need to be making sure that, as Alex just said, we've got an inclusive economy and we need to run the council well, as Nigel quite rightly said, to make get the best value for the taxpayer and make sure that we are delivering the services that people need, but also the services that people value. So thank you very much. We are basically being asked to agree the business plan priorities and to note the progress made in delivery against the actions set out in last year's business plan. Is everyone happy to agree those recommendations? Thank you very much. Right, we are now on to item 11, which, right. I haven't skipped one. No, I have skipped one. Sorry, I was thinking that's not right. Item 10, I beg your pardon, which is the allocation of preventing homelessness budget. And Linda, over to you.
Thank you. I think now is a good time for us to join our colleagues on the scrutiny committee and congratulate the Housing Needs team on their nomination for the LGC award for Team of the Year.
Yay!
And to say we're very proud of them and wish them well at the award ceremony later in the year.
Fingers crossed.
We're all coming.
I think it's also important to remember that this work is all non-statutory. It's work we fund as a council because we care about it, because we believe nobody should have to sleep rough on the streets of Oxford. And we're determined to do all we can to make that a reality. We have been allocated £600,000 of additional grant from government for the next financial year for work in this area. And I'm pleased we've been able to use 100,000 of that to add to this budget. I'm particularly pleased that we're able to provide an uplift in the grant that we're making available to both the Gatehouse and the Porch, which are really at the front line of looking after the welfare of people who are still sleeping rough and who are vulnerably housed in our city. And the Porch in particular has really stepped up what they do in terms of the daycare services, or not daycare services, but day services they provide in the city. And, you know, we're really proud of all the work they do as well. And I'm pleased that we're able to really put a rocket under the work to move towards a more housing-led approach. We know that the current solutions we've got, the current setup in terms of supported accommodation doesn't work for everybody. And for too many people, they do cycle in and out of those services and become entrenched in terms of sleeping on the street. And I believe that the more housing first style solutions we can have, the better that it's going to be, the more people we can help to move on with their lives. So I'm really pleased that we're seeing an expansion in that area of work. And after that, I'll hand over to the officers to take you through the rest of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I think we've got Francesca, Ossie and Neris. So over to you.
So I'll start just to add a little bit of context. Thank you, Councillor Smith, for a very well introduced report. Just want a bit of context in relation to the kind of what we're seeing on the streets. Since this report was written, the government has launched their national rough sleeping figures, and there's been in the media, and as we've seen nationally, rough sleeping numbers have increased quite significantly by 20%. But in Oxford has seen a decrease around 10-11%, which is a positive and show that we're doing some really good work in a very difficult circumstances with the partners we work with, that we commission, and other statutory partners. And this is also something we see. So we report data to the government every month as well, and we meet with our rough sleeping advisor every month to go over the data. And this is something that's also been seen throughout the last 18 months, that we haven't seen the same increases nationally in Oxford at all. So we've been more good. So that's good. Although saying that, there are still challenges. We still have higher numbers than we want. We don't want anyone to be rough sleeping, and some of the things that we see is primarily people who are, like Councillor Smith said, people are left rough sleeping on the streets long term, or returning to rough sleeping. And why we think we have a good support accommodation offer, like I said, for people to move into their own home and receive the support there. That's areas we really want to put more funding into.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail. So the context that Ossie just discussed, it very much informs our allocation of all funding that we receive for services. The City Council's commissioning budget for homeless services for single individuals, is comprised of the PHB, but we also receive additional grant funding from central government through various funding streams. The recommendations for the PHB, which are outlined in this paper, very much align with our strategic direction and the situation around rough sleeping numbers in the city. We've amended some of the allocations for the PHB for the coming year, as per the report, the main change being our intention to repurpose funding to deliver a housing-led approach within the Oxfordshire Homelessness Alliance, as Councillor Smith touched on earlier. This offer includes an additional commitment of £100,000 from the council, and will very much mean that more people are able to move into their own accommodation and receive support in that accommodation.
Neris, anything to add? Well, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from people? Alex.
It's a small comment based on, for a long time, being the ward councillor for what was Carfax ward, and obviously that's got a lot of services, but also lots of need and things. And one of the things which came up very, very often, and I'm sure all of us as councillors and officers will have come across this, which is there are many groups of people and individuals who are particularly prone to homelessness, people with mental health issues, people with, say, drug or alcohol problems, people who've been in the armed forces and tend to find themselves really struggling. But the one group who are the most difficult and are often treated as people who have lost any right are former offenders, particularly from particular sorts of offences. So I was particularly pleased in the proposal not just to retain but to increase that service. It's the toughest service for a group of people who are in the most need of help, and the services that we and others offer can be transformational if we get them right, or and it's not a guarantee it's going to be transformational, as it isn't with any of these groups, but it is fundamentally important that even though they are probably at the bottom of a lot of people's list of priorities, they are not for us, and I'm pleased by that. So I wanted to say thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Abner.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to really congratulate Linda Smith and the panel who are here today and online, and everyone who's made a major effort in making this possible for our city, for everyone across the board. So I just really want to put that on record, that it's really important to us, and we're really grateful for all the hard work that you guys and ladies are doing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Linda, did you want to add anything?
No, nothing else.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions. I would agree with the positive comments. I mean, we are really grateful to you all for the fantastic job you're doing. I mean, those figures really are to be, I was going to say to be celebrated. They're not to be celebrated, are they? Because, you know, as you quite rightly said, Ossie, we don't want to see anybody sleeping rough, but it is a tribute to your really excellent work that at a time when the housing situation in Oxford is so serious, and the national picture is seeing really big increases in people rough sleeping, that we're actually seeing decreases. And that's absolutely what we would want to see, because we don't want to see anyone sleeping rough. So well done and thank you. I think we can just move on to the recommendations in the report, which are to approve the allocation of the budget, to approve the grants that are set out in the report, and to delegate the authority to do the rest of the allocation of the budget as set out in the table, as set out in the report. Everyone happy with those recommendations? Thank you very much, and thank you all very much as well. We are now on to our last substantive item on the agenda, which is the contract for the supply of HIA ramps, level access showers, wet rooms and associated bathroom works. Linda, over to you, and Becky, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a very straightforward report that will just allow our award-winning home improvement agency to get on with the work that they need to do. I would just like to point out that the report does contain a reference to really important procurement policies that we have in place around the Oxford Living Wage, around social value and buying locally. And yeah, Becky's online to answer any detailed questions you may have about what's a fairly technical report. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Becky, is there anything you want to add?
No, nothing to that. I think that's very well summed up.
Lovely. Has anyone got any questions? I'm not entirely surprised to find there are no questions. So in which case, can we just focus on the recommendations, which are to approve the procurement of a framework agreement and delegate the authority to enter into it? Is everyone happy to agree that? Thank you all very much, and thank you, Becky, for waiting for what was a very, very quick appearance at committee. So thank you very much, and thank you for the work. And yeah, we're extremely proud of our home improvement agency as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you heard the clap. So we are on to final item on the agenda, which is the minutes. Is everyone happy to agree them as an accurate record? Agreed. In which case, thank you all very much. The next meeting is on the 9th of April. I close the meeting.